Hi, I'm Bill Dodson, entrepreneur and owner here at Shires Coloniale Distillery. One of the projects that we're working that's very dear to my heart in this is trying to recreate that original spirit, the very first spirit in colonial America, the one John Smith brought over with him at the time. It would have been distilled from a barley malt that they brought over them. The first batch was burned. They had to throw it out, so they didn't get malt until the second group of ships came over. When that second group of ships came over, they would have used the stills they had at hand to create those first medicines. The next project we're taking on is America's first bourbon. In doing our research, we started to get some of the original equipment and the original ingredients in. And I got the first batch of corn in, and I looked at it and I said, ooh, I can't use that corn. And one of the workers said, why? I said, because a company called Monsanto is involved, or GMO. And they didn't have GMO back at the time. So we had to go back and research and find some of the original grains. We found maize, something you might call Indian corn, and found some local farmers to grow it. It's been quite an experience because the farming techniques are very different than what is done with GMO corn today. Then we got the first batch of molasses in and had a similar experience. I looked at it and I said, oh, I can't use that because it's not the original bottom half of the molasses that was used to make the period rum. So we had to research and find a manufacturer that was making molasses similar to the period. Finally, we found one in South America that's using just the bottom cut of molasses. A little different than the rum that you drink today. So we've imported some malt from England, similar to what John Smith would have had. We've got the original John Smith still. We're having reproduction bottles made by the glass blowers at Jamestown. But most excitingly, we have the only 10 gallons of water taken out of a Jamestown well since the early 1600s.
With such a valuable and limited ingredient, we needed to talk to an expert in both the fields of archaeology and distilling alcohol. This brought us right back to Jamestown, where the water was uncovered, to speak with David Givens.
So I got involved in brewing I grew up on a farm in Blacksburg, and we were brewing beer. And our first batch didn't go so well, but what I was struck with was the process, the chemistry, and that's what I got interested in. And our beer was flat, which was the problem. But the hard water was interesting, working with lime water and things like that. And so I never got out of my interest in brewing. I was struck with how much work goes into making alcohol. So, people go into a store and they buy beer, and what's lost in that, in the history, is that we're out of touch as the public or maybe general people in America don't understand. And so it began an interest for me in how we got to where we are. Documentation on the stills that we have here at Jamestown are pretty thin. A lot of researchers think ours were used for alchemy, and they certainly would have been. Really, the sum of the project here is to understand or know about how these were operated, and that's into a field that we call experimental archaeology. So our friends at Corning Glass made several of these, and we're going to conduct experimental archaeology and make a whiskey or a scotch from a mash and see how the process would work. And one of the things I thought about is, could we use the water from our well in the Jamestown liquor? And that's what we did. And so literally when our liquor comes out, which again, we're going to be using experimental stuff, and I'm excited about that, you're going to be drinking history.
With the ingredients gathered, all that was left to do was resurrect the original still to craft it in, making Steve Eisenhart the perfect man to speak with, holding both the titles brewing engineer and coppersmith.
When George Washington established his stills in Mount Vernon, he used a larger still design, a still that was used for commercial use. I have several designs of stills. I adapted some of Washington's still designs into a later version. Copper is the kind of material that will not contaminate anything that you try to use for a still. So stills have always been, as far back as I can research, have always been made out of copper.
Rediscovery, the archaeologist down at Jamestown, walked in and said, we have the first still in America. And I said, great, I've got a coppersmith. And both of them looked at me and said, no, you don't need a coppersmith. What you need is somebody to make a ceramic still and somebody to make a hand-blown glass still. We were very interested in it because we originally thought the first stills were copper. Come to find out, they were hand-blown glass, very carefully carried over on the first ships that came to America.
Some of the concepts that involve the design of marrying a copper piece to a glass piece, and doing that with the knowledge that we have about what they did in early Jamestown, is where we have to do some engineering with that. As a coppersmith, I can do anything with copper, but to marry it up with glass is just a new experience for me.
So we've put together this water, this original still. We're having the Jamestown Glass House blow us some original medicine bottles like John Smith would have had during the period. We're going to combine all this with a single malt from England, much like the one John Smith would have brought over, to create an original early 1600s brew and distillation similar to what John Smith would have done at the time. It's a very interesting project that we're trying to do to help raise some money for more archaeological research at Jamestown to determine the origins of distillation here in America. We'd love to have you join us. If you'd like to join us in our projects of distilling the American spirit, come join us. Come see us out here at Shires Colonial Distillery in Williamsburg, Virginia.